Welcome to Build. Today I'm joined by Sara Ramirez, who plays Kat on the CBS show Madam Secretary, which follows the Secretary of State and her team as they tackle domestic and global issues. A recent episode deals with the LGBTQ rights around the world, so we are also joined by Jessica Stern from Outright Action International and Lori Mccreary, the show's executive producer. But before we bring them out, let's take a look at next week's episode.
Without you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Sorry I'm late, ma'am, but I was on a very, very troubling call with our embassy in Abkhazia.
What's up?
The police raided an LGBTQ nightclub in Sukhumi. They locked everyone up on trumped-up charges of prostitution and resisting arrest.
Isn't it like the 5th raid this month?
That we've heard about.
Exactly. There are reports of beatings, torture, and in some cases, death, all while in police custody. All of these people disappeared after the raid, and even if they were lucky enough to evade the authorities and are in hiding, it's only a matter of time before they're hunted down.
I'm alarmed, but not surprised. Abkhazia legalized homosexuality, what, a year ago after they gained full independence? Not like they're happy about it.
Ma'am, asylum seekers at our embassy are saying this is a pogrom against the LGBTQ community.
Well, let's find out if that's true.
I can reach out to Brent Rosen. He's now the executive director at the Human Crisis Foundation. They usually have solid on-the-ground intel with LGBTQ issues.
Okay, good. I'm gonna have a chat with President Lakova, let him know that we're watching. Kat, would you please join?
Absolutely.
Hey guys, give it up for Sarah, Lori. Welcome to Build, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Are you guys a little tired from the daylight savings thing? I really am.
I know, right? It takes a minute to
super
adjust.
lethargic for no good
Absolutely.
reason.
That's it.
But
I thought I was sick, and then somebody reminded me.
That's what it is.
it's also just Monday, but I feel like this is a really good way to start a Monday, is by seeing your amazing faces and having this conversation. So thanks for joining us. I want to start with you, Sada. So we just saw your character, Kat, and I feel like she was really the driving force behind this episode a little bit. So can you kind of tell us who Kat is?
Sure. Kat Sandoval is the policy advisor to Madam Secretary. Her background is that she worked in policy advising before policy strategist. She was also the chief of staff to the UN ambassador for a while. Then she took a 5-year break, bought an avocado farm, and moved to California. It took a little break. Sometimes you gotta take a break. So she made her way back through a meeting with Madam Secretary that was really around her book tour and sort of like her experience leaving politics. But she is such a huge fan of Madam Secretary that she was more than excited to sort of put herself out there in the running for her next policy advisor, and it worked out. So I'm certainly grateful.
She was so badass in the room on the episode that we basically wanted to hire her on the spot, so.
I love that when it just is magic and it just works. And so we just saw a clip from next week's episode, which I think tackles a really important issue. So can you sort of give us a little bit of the plot and what the episode's going to be about?
Sure, yeah. You know, the episode has about 2 or 3 different storylines. So we're really discussing one of the storylines. And this storyline is really centering the persecution and violence perpetrated against a very vulnerable group of LGBTQI folks internationally in another country. And obviously because this show focuses on foreign policy and diplomacy, you know, this is a very rich storyline where we all kind of come together in the State Department to try to figure out how to help these people. Is there a way for them to escape or flee? And usually there isn't, is my understanding. And so specifically Jay and Kat sort of take on this situation, trying to find a solution that won't derail our foreign policy. And with specific countries, I know we're being sort of careful in the countries that we describe, but in the process of the episode coming together, it was really wonderful to collaborate together. And originally, I was approached by a couple of the producers, including Taya, sharing with me that an international LGBTQI storyline was coming down the pike, and would I be interested in, you know, participating in some way, contributing, collaborating. And I was so excited about the prospect of this. I certainly have a lot to learn about, you know, our work internationally when it comes to LGBTQI rights. And so I happen to have a couple of colleagues who knew Jessica Stern at Outright, and so they said, well, let's set you up a meeting to meet with her. And I was so excited that, you know, the executive director of the actual organization that does this work is a queer woman. And so yay for that, you know? When do we center our queer women doing this work? Absolutely applaud for her. And I think that's really exciting. So we sat down and I was given Lori's blessing to come in and describe some of the plot. You know, I was a little vague here and there, but really the intention was to bring in Outright International to sort of help us understand where the areas in the script where we need to look out a little bit more specifically for how we might be putting folks internationally in more vulnerable positions by you know, situating the storyline in a specific country. Is that going to work right now? What's going on in that country? Let's find out. And although Madam Secretary, also to Madam Secretary's credit, to the show's credit, they already vet their storylines, you know, to the nth degree. They've got all these amazing contacts. But I was really excited that Lori also was so open to welcoming Jessica into the process as well as another voice to influence and to advise us, you know, to tell these stories responsibly.
And Lori, I know the show is actually based in the future a couple of years, right? So was this storyline based on actual events, or what was sort of the inspiration for this episode?
Right, we're 1 or 2 election cycles ahead of today. And unfortunately, it's completely based on actual events. We've kind of morphed 2 or 3 different types of events into one episode, but it's happening around the world right now as we speak. And I'm really thrilled that we can shine a light on this. And bringing in Jessica really helped, because when I originally when we sent the script to Sara, we sent the script to Sara to look at it, I was really thinking, she's so great at helping us language things. And I wanted to make sure that even the language and the dialogue in the script, this is something that Sara has taught us, is honoring everyone. And when I first sent it to Sara, I expected to come back with a bunch of notes about that, which she did, which was great. It really helped us. But what I didn't expect to hear was that if we named the specific country that we did in the original version of the script, that it would be very bad for the people on the ground. And this is where Jessica really helped us. She is in touch with the people who are on the ground doing this work every day. And it would be the last thing that we would ever want on our show, is to shine a light onto a situation that would cause things to be worse. So we talked to Jessica. She gave us some really good ideas about how we might be able to talk about a country that wasn't the specific country and still get the same message out. And our writers, David Gray, Barbara Hall, and Christy Korzik, went back and really changed the entire framework of the script to work for a country that wouldn't cause so many problems.
Yeah. And Jessica, can you tell us a little bit about what Outreach Action International does?
I would be happy to tell you. So Outright is a global LGBTI rights organization. We have staff and offices in 7 countries around the world. And our global headquarters is here in New York because the UN is headquartered in New York. And so someone has to be a watchdog on what governments are doing. And so when Madam Secretary, as a storyline, came across my email box, I was so excited, because one of the things we try to do is help Americans to think globally, right? A lot of Americans only think in terms of domestic policy, but we're a world superpower. We have to think about our actions around the world. And so this storyline really resonated with us, because the facts of the episode actually are loosely based on things that happen. So, of course, last year we saw 71 people arrested in Egypt after some concert goers unfurled a rainbow flag at a music show. We saw 141 people arrested in Indonesia at a gay party. And then we've seen country after country where people have been accused of conspiring to commit gay marriage when maybe they're actually just celebrating someone's birthday. And so the opportunity to shine a spotlight, but as Lori and Sara say, shine a spotlight in a way that is ethical and accurate, was an enormous opportunity for us.
And are there certain regions of the world that are a little more problematic or troublesome? And what are some of the biggest sort of threats towards the LGBTQ community around the world?
Well, I always answer that question by saying the place where people are most unsafe is the place where you live and you are deprived of rights, whether it's access to bathrooms in New York City schools or a lack of ability to go to obtain fair and equal access in housing or employment. But yeah, there are places around the world where you see the government actually arresting LGBT people in mass numbers. And that's, you know, those are some of the incidents that Americans have seen in the past year. A year ago in Chechnya, we saw 100 gay men systematically rounded up and arrested because their names had been shared under conditions of torture. And so one of the things we're trying to say to Americans is, how can you use your safety and security and privilege in the service of LGBTI people around the world?
And how can we? Because, I mean, watching the episode, I felt a little helpless because it does seem there's a lot of red tape and a lot of things happening politically, but just as like an American, it's troublesome to see that, but what can I do?
Well, I couldn't help but notice that there's a person in the audience right now, Erin Morris, who's the executive director of Immigration Equality, which is an incredible organization that fights for the safety and security of LGBTI immigrants and refugees to the U.S. So on one end of the spectrum, we can make sure that the U.S. is a safe place for immigrants. We can make sure that asylum seekers and refugees are welcome here. And that's one side of the story. But the bigger side of the story is that most LGBTI people don't want to leave their homes. They can't leave their homes. And as this episode shows, even with the support of the Secretary of State of the world's leading superpower, it's really hard to do. And so what we have to do is partner with organizations like Outright so that people are safe where they live. And that looks like, well, there are any number of ways that you can help, but the first thing to do is know that LGBTI stories are happening every day, and we need Americans to pay attention.
And I would say that if you were moved or somewhat outraged by our episode, you can get in touch with Jessica or Outright International. It's outrightinternational.org. They need support. How many of you guys had heard about Outright International before today? Okay, a handful. But the rest of you, it's really important. The work they're doing is so important. It's so important to individuals and big groups around the world.
Yeah, and I think also it's important to remember, and this is something I learned in doing this episode, was that, when we talk about, gay and bisexual and or trans folks being rounded up in Chechnya, when we talk about all of our queer family being rounded up in these, under trumped up charges, and this is obviously happening in its own way in the United States. But what I learned also in this episode is don't underestimate racism and xenophobia in other countries as well, that can sometimes become an issue in who is looking out for who, even within the LGBTQ community, which is something I also didn't expect to learn. And that's something you can watch the episode to find out more about what I'm talking about. That there is some crossover there. Things that we are also dealing with here in the United States are happening globally as well in that respect.
So, Lori, what did you learn? She just mentioned sort of something new that she was sort of kind of struck by. Is there anything that really jumped out at you in doing research for this episode?
Well, I'd seen firsthand in America how LGBTQ individuals are treated, and I felt that we had come fairly far, and then I've lived through the last couple years and feel like, wow, we have so far to go. And then when we talked to Jessica and saw what was happening internationally, and there's so many communities worldwide that are so oppressed, afraid for their lives, just because of who they are. And I feel really privileged to be a part of a group that wants to shine a light on this. I feel really privileged and honored to be able to do a show that shines a light on those. What I learned was there are groups like Jessica's that all of us can be involved with every day or every week or every month just by supporting them.
Definitely every day, Lori.
Okay, every day.
Every single day.
That we can do something about it. We don't have to just sit on our couch and think, oh my gosh, this is so horrible.
One thing I also wanted to tease was that, I've only learned a few things about Kat Sandoval up until now. This international LGBTQI plus storyline turns out to be quite personal for her. And why that is, we find out on Sunday night.
So that's taking me into the next sort of part, because I feel like in addition to the global issues, she sits down with her coworker and has this very honest and open conversation, and it really allows him to ask questions about her identity and her sexual orientation. So I think that's going to be a teachable moment for a lot of viewers who maybe don't have somebody who's gay or bisexual in their lives. And so for you, doing that scene, do you feel like that was important, or what was that experience like, getting to have this open conversation on network TV?
I was really grateful at the opportunity to collaborate, to actually contribute to the language used in the script. Christy Korzak and the writers, Barbara Hall, everybody was just very open to hearing my feedback on how we were going to navigate that scene, and so was Sebastian, who plays Jay Whitman. And we were very excited at the prospect. Again, this is an aspirational show, so we are modeling an aspirational conversation that might seem a little awkward or difficult to have. right now, but I don't think it has to be. And so we're modeling that in this scene between two people who happen to have a few things in common. They're both biracial, they're both Latinx, part Latinx, Kat and Jay. So they have a few things in common, which is interesting, and then they have a lot of things that they don't have in common. And so for two people to come together and kind of share, create a safer space for one another to share about each other's connections to this storyline, to the LGBTQ folks overseas, is really, really important. One, because again, we rarely see a conversation like that modeled, where two people are sort of, one person is sort of admitting they don't really know much about this world, and the other person is sort of sharing what they know to be true about themselves and this subject matter. And then the other thing that I find important about that scene is that we rarely see, you know, sort of these kinds of storylines that are nuanced around a character that has more to them than meets the eye. And so we continue to find out more about Kat, and it's really important to listen to the language that she uses and to really pay attention to the ways that she opens up about her personal life in that conversation. I don't want to say too much.
I don't want to give it away, but I know exactly what you're talking about, and I was really impressed by it because I have a lot of friends in the community, and I've had the opportunity to ask those questions, and I feel like a lot of people don't. So I feel like people watching will, for the first time, maybe understand things that they were curious about but didn't have the opportunity or maybe the bravery to ask, which I think knowledge is so important.
Yeah, Jay models that for sure, kind of that being brave and asking and saying, I don't know. This might sound wrong, I'm just going to say something.
It's okay sometimes. I think if you're furthering along and having a conversation that's going to be productive, I think that's the most important part.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's a great thing I'm learning from Sara. It's okay to ask a question. I asked Jessica this morning, okay, it's LGBTQ, what's the I? And I got a good explanation.
I'm so glad you asked. Modeling good conversations right now. I actually stands for intersex. And intersex people have been some of the most excluded and overlooked globally. Intersex means you've been born with sex chromosomes that may conventionally be described as not neatly fitting into the category of male or female. And so it really ruptures our notion of gender. But what it calls upon us is to understand that intersex people have human rights, and intersex people should not be discriminated against because their bodies don't fit into conventional definitions of who a woman or man should be.
Another thing I really liked about Kat is that you played Callie on Grey's Anatomy, who was also bisexual, and she had a whole different look. She dressed completely different, and Kat has her own identity, and I thought that was really cool, at least for me as a viewer, to watch that this isn't just, everybody's individual, everybody's different, and being bisexual doesn't mean you look a certain way or dress a certain way. So again, was that something that was intentional for the show, to just show the variety, the diversity of the community, and it's not just looking or being one certain way?
You know, I think without, again, revealing too much, we already have the character of Blake, who came out as bisexual on the show, played by Eric Bergen, in season 3, I believe. Is that when that character came out to Madam Secretary? So there's already representation going on. But in this particular episode, we do have various different life experiences under that LGBTQ sort of, you know, banner, if you will. And so it is exciting to, again, just share another lived experience, another version that is not often centered in media, in mainstream media this way. So that's really exciting.
It's so important, I think, for everyone to see a version of themselves, to see themselves, to say, oh, I see me. And so I hope that part of what we do on Madam Secretary is show a broad swath of humanity so we all can see ourselves.
Yeah, I think the context in which we're having these conversations right now is just really exciting. I think that we are starting to really deconstruct gender. I think we're starting to kind of remember that fluidity was always a part of the LGBTQI community from day one. And so I think we're just now starting to embrace these concepts that, you know, there's more than just identifying as a man or a woman. There's more than two genders. There's folks that are non-binary, that are human and valid and valuable and matter. Those lives matter too. So it is important to continue to expand the language we use, and we definitely do that in that scene, I think, to a certain degree.
And I think TV in general is just in this really beautiful spot where, like, as a Black woman, I've never been more empowered by the women I'm seeing in front of the camera, behind the camera, and I'm hoping that every little person, whatever their situation is able to see themselves represented on TV, and I feel like very hopeful about that now. I'm seeing it more and more.
Yeah, I have to commend the show too, because, you know, to actually get to know your actors, to the point where you're like, hey, I think you can contribute here, and the writer's room is curious to know what you think. It also feels a little rare to a certain degree, but I was invited in based on all the things that, that I said are, this is who I am. When we first met around, the possibility of me being on the show, I said, this is me right now, and this is what it is, and so let's go with that. And everybody really embraced it. So I'm certainly appreciative, and this is a very personal story for me with Kat. So I also feel like really grateful because this is healing for me. I've had to kind of volunteer to play characters that I can relate to because I didn't have any growing up. So the characters I've been playing and I'm playing now are characters that could have saved me when I was younger and questioning a lot of things and feeling, super confused or depressed or whatever. This representation is so important. This visibility is so important. And I, again, feel so grateful that I've been able to play characters that I rarely see on screen. And I know there are young people out there who can relate to these characters.
And so to each of you, before we open up to the audience for questions, they're not going to get to see this episode for another week, but after they do, what are you hoping the conversations are afterwards? What are you hoping that people kind of take away from it?
I hope people go to outrightinternational.org and get involved, donate. They need funds. This is important work, so get involved that way, volunteer, educate yourself. That's actually what I hope people walk away with the most. But I also hope that it empowers some folks to see themselves represented as well and know that they're valuable and that there are young, brown, native, black people who are LGBTQI who can see themselves in leadership positions in the government. I think that's even more important right now. You look at Andrea Jenkins, who is the first openly transgender black woman who's also openly bisexual, recently won an election, in Minnesota. That was really exciting. I met her recently. She's a badass. Wow. She's amazing. Wow. So my hope is that the show itself, but also the representation of Kat Sandoval, will continue to celebrate these kinds of outcomes. It normalizes our existence in the world, including in these high-level positions.
Including and especially in the high level.
Yeah.
How about you, Lori?
Well, I hope that people turn around to each other on the couch with tears in their eyes, because every time I watch it, I can't stop having tears in my eyes, and say, what can we do? And when they go to their workplace the next day, they talk to people in a way they didn't before and talk about how they can become active. It's a great time in our world and in our country especially, unfortunately. All of us are becoming more active. I am. And so I'm hoping that it spurs us to do something more.
Ditto all of that. We need the media to actually represent diversity because that's a reflection of reality. And so I'm hoping that people say, I loved learning about LGBTI people around the world. I want more stories like this. I want more stories that make me think and show me a different storyline. And so that's the first thing. I hope we validate shows like Madam Secretary and crave more. The second thing is, I totally agree with Sara. This is a moment in our country. People are organizing. They are hungry for opportunities to become activists, to work on new issues, to connect with organizations. I hope they see Outright as a resource and all that. And then the third thing is, I hope it inspires compassion. I hope it inspires people to say, no one should go out to have a good time with their friends on a Saturday night and end up arrested. And if that can happen to one LGBT person anywhere in the world, then it can happen to me. And so I want to put a stop to this, and I'm going to vote accordingly. I'm going to demand that LGBTIQ+ rights are a part of U.S. foreign policy.
Absolutely. Applause for that. Vote accordingly.
Yes.
Amen, amen.
Exercise that right in the right way. Now let's open it up for questions with the audience.
Hi. So the show sort of balances personal drama and political drama, like international affairs and some, family issues. Is it hard to kind of balance both or deal with, some of the global issues going on and then some things at home?
It's a good question. When we first started talking about how we could do a show like this, one of our intentions was to encourage people to join public service, because I feel like people who are in our foreign service and who are in the State Department diplomatic service are the true superheroes of our planet. They're actually saving lives every day, and we hardly hear about them. So we wanted to encourage people to do that, but we didn't want it to be a show just about this badass Secretary of State that could do it all on her own. We wanted it to be people that I know, like Sara Ramirez, people that I know that should be Secretary of State and also have a family and also have to deal with the politics of like who has the best parking place and who got time off on the long weekend instead of me. And so balancing all of those things on our show is a feat that our writers do a bang-up job on. They spend weeks plotting out, making sure that we don't give too much to the family, not too much to international. I mean, our LGBTQI episode was, we could have spent the entire episode just on the international diplomacy of it all and hoping to save the people. Don't want to give it away. But we really thought it was more important to have an in, like a dramatic in for what people were going through personally, Kat's and Jay's character going through personally about it. And I think that's how we help people really connect with an international incident, when there's a real personal connection.
I do love that about the show too, that it's not just the politics, because nobody is just their job,
Yes.
right? So to show her as a working mother, your character as a working mother as well, I think is also like just as important in a lot of ways. Who do we have next?
Hi, ladies. I was wondering, what was the reaction like for this season with the LGBTQ community and as well as the Latino community as well?
In response to?
To the new season.
Oh, to the new season
so
in general? Well, I'm not in touch with all of them, but
But after
No, I
this
mean,
episode, you will be.
this episode I might be. No, I mean, I can't speak for I don't know how everybody feels about how this season's going. I know that I've gotten a lot of positive feedback around, the representation I bring to the show. Not necessarily because of the character, because folks are still getting to know the character, but in terms of myself as the actor and everything that I represent in real life. So that's, I've gotten positive feedback there. And again, to have a Latinx person in the mix is also important. So I think I hope at least that folks are happy to see that representation.
We've gotten nothing but great feedback. CBS has been really great about making sure that they're helping us shine the light on the projects that shine a light. So I think for us, and our ratings are great, even though we're on at 10 o'clock now. People are DVRing more. But yeah, it's been a great audience response and lots of questions about what's going to happen next. And it's an exciting time.
I just want to add to that. Outright works with a lot of diplomats and a lot of State Department officials. So this TV show is like candy for people who do this work every day. But when Kat's character was introduced to the storyline, suddenly I saw Sara's photo in my Facebook feed like every day. So people are watching and loving the new character.
I love that.
Great.
And we have one more question.
Hi.
Hello.
I was wondering, this is for all of you, what would you say to like young children or just people in general who aren't being accepted in their society because, in different parts of the country, like they're not being accepted because of who they are?
You just have to drop the emotional question, don't you? Well, look, one of the reasons why I decided to become an activist and pursue the kind of career I have at Outright was because of my own life experiences, because I saw too many people that I knew as a young person fall through the cracks. Not be seen, not have images of themselves on TV or in movies, not have books where they could read our histories. And when you are told that your life story doesn't matter, when you can't find any images of yourself, when you feel invisible, you feel like you don't have value. And today in 2018, I feel like there are so many more resources out there that I have hope. And so if I were talking to a young person today, I mean, the truth is, I talk to young people about LGBTI rights all the time, and they're like, I identify as they and them, and I would appreciate it if you wouldn't assign a gender to me. So what I'm hearing is that a lot of young people have access to resources today. They're finding what they need, but if they feel isolated, if they feel afraid, then I would encourage them to reach out to Outright, reach out to organizations like Immigration Equality, reach out to organizations that can meet them where they are and direct them to survival resources, because we're out there and we want to be there for them.
Absolutely. There's great, also the True Colors Fund I keep thinking of, because they work with youth who are experiencing homelessness who identify as LGBTQ. That's another great organization. So getting involved in the work is sometimes life-saving work for yourself and others. So I think that's a really great idea.
And I would just echo what you both said. Find your community, find a community close to you, and write your story. There are lots of us who want to tell your story. So write your story and find your community and
keep speaking
connect.
truth to power.
Thank you.
Keep
Thank
speaking
you.
truth.
I didn't know where I was going to go with that.
Well, guys, this is an amazing conversation. I could probably talk to you for another hour. I want to urge people to check out Outright Action International if you haven't already on your phones. And then make sure you check out Madam Secretary every Sunday at 9 Central. Guys, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.